So it looks like the Tyranids are going to be receiving a rather big plastic range refresh for 10th edition. Aside from the confirmed or teased stuff, let's talk about what models their range really needs. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking 10th edition Tyranids once more, and today I thought we'd do a bit more of a speculative video and talk over a few potential models from the Tyranids history that could be the potential targets for Games Workshop to refresh for 10th, as basically the 40k antagonist faction for 10th edition, as Necrons and Death Guard were before them. They'll be getting a whole ton of new and updated kits, and while Games Workshop definitely have the potential to surprise us with all manner of wonderful bugs, big and small, I feel there's maybe a few from the past that have a real potential to come up again here. GW do like to mine their old lore for some nostalgia, and to give a modern makeover to things that were dropped at one stage or another. Currently, I would perhaps argue that the Tyranid Range is actually a fairly big one as Warhammer 40k factions go. They've got a bunch of different options for all of the classic Force organisation slots, even if it sounds like those are going the way of the Dodo in 10th, and in general I'd argue really quite a good spread of units, most battlefield roles filled pretty well. They've got a decent amount of shooting and melee bugs, both big and small, plus perhaps a few of the more completist type battlefield roles filled quite well, a couple of different options for artillery, their own unique flyers, and a fortification in the Spore Assist. However though, they haven't had a major model release in really quite a long time. I kind of feel like Games Workshop might have been just saving up all the Tyranids that they had in the box to save up for a release wave that was really quite a big one in 10th. I do kind of wonder as well if a bit of the design energy that was mainly going into Tyranids might have been channeled into Genestealer Cult, and Games Workshop invested some resources in giving them a sort of allied faction, as opposed to putting yet more varieties of bugs into the main army. In general though, really quite a lot of kits do stick out as being a bit on the older side and potentially due an update. There are a fair bunch of models that had old rules that no longer have a model or never had one in the first place. And plus, maybe out of battlefield roles, I feel like a super heavy is perhaps a pretty major class that they don't really have an option for, at least in plastic. Or maybe something like a Supreme Commander Centerpiece, something a bit bigger than the Swarm Lord. With Tyranids, Games Workshop could give us all manner of different flavours of bugs that are slightly bigger or smaller than the others and fill in some gaps yet more. But I feel like for the most part they'll try and really want to make sure that each variety of Tyranid doesn't impinge too much on the roles of its brothers, and they all have a clear battlefield role. As we've talked about in a couple of videos recently, I feel like a fair few things are quite likely from the reveal trailer. I thought we'd focus on other things more today, but just to get them out of the way, the Termagants and the Hormagaunts both appeared. Both of those have issues, whether it's mould lines or falling over. Biovores and Lictors both featured, both of those old Finecast models with kind of horrible value in terms of money per point, and in a similar vein to the Biovores, the Pyrovore could also do with an update too. The Screamer Killer Carnifex looks like he's getting a different model to further differentiate him from the standard Carnifex and not just use a variant of that kit now. And out of potential new units in the trailer, there was the Winged Prime or Mini Flyrant, a Psychic Bug with a couple of attendants, and some sort of things that looks like a small Toxicrine or Haruspex, perhaps feeder beasts for eating up some biomass. My guess would be that all of these are quite likely to get new kits already just from being in the trailer, but I'm sure that Tyranids will get a fair amount more than this. I feel like the trailer ones might well focus on the launch box contents, but then we'll get a fair bit more besides, as Necrons did. First up, I thought one area that Games Workshop could certainly revisit are the old Tyranid characters, things like the Doom of Malantai or maybe the Red Terror. They have recently redone the Parasite of Mortrex, which kind of shows they are open to the idea. That's the one that flies around spawning Rippers. I believe that the Doom of Malantai was introduced at the same time as the Parasite of Mortrex, and was similarly a bug that had rules but never really got a model. Though from the old artwork that you can see on the left, it is kind of similar to the Tyranid Neurothrope, though not 100% the same. This brain bug had some rather fun lore attached, basically a Tyranid organism that the Eldar failed to realise had infested one of their craft worlds, and gradually fed off the psychic energies there, basically becoming near invulnerable. The more psychic energy that it drains, the stronger it got, until there wasn't anything that they could do about it, and it just slaughtered its way across the doomed craft world. A fair few people were thinking that the psychic creature from the trailer could be the Doom of Malantai, and it does seem possible enough. In game, I'd guess it might have some sort of healing mechanic where if it manages to deal some damage with the psychic powers, it could potentially get tougher and harder to kill. It did have some pretty fun rules to that effect when it came out originally. Another potential Tyranid character that they might well be able to redo could be the Red Terror as well. This thing, unlike the Parasite and the Doom of Malantai, did have a model. It was basically a sized raised Ravener variant that had some fairly cool lore associated with Hive Fleet Kraken. The Red Terror was a Ravener that struck from the deep, butchering entire platoons of enemy infantry, was instrumental to the fall of one Imperial world that it was under Tyranid assault, and then even managed to get off-ship by hiding aboard a mining vessel, slaughtering its crew, and when it made automatic docking with the next world, went to work on that one in earnest and butchered an entire Imperial colony. The Imperium never recorded another similar encounter with a Tyranid like this, though with all the new innovation from the higher fleets they might recycle some old ideas, and it could be another Tyranid pseudo character a bit like the Parasite. The model I believe was an old metal one that I think was updated to resin, though it got dropped before 8th edition 40k, so didn't get some rules there I don't believe. I kind of wonder whether they'd keep the same name for it, or update it to something else. It's maybe just a little bit on the nose for real world historical events, even though that's perhaps not the most abnormal thing for Warhammer. Otherwise, beyond the characters, Games Workshop do like their big centerpiece models these days. I feel like it would be really quite unlikely for a big Tyranid release to come out without some sort of Biotitan or plastic super heavy for the faction. Tyranids do seem to be surprisingly lacking for this one. The Necrons have their Monolith and Tesseract Vault, the Eldar have their Wraith Knights and the Tower have got their Storm Surge, the Orcs have their Stomper, and now the Gorkanaut and Morkanauts. I feel like Tyranids having a super heavy all of their own is kind of overdue if anything. They are well known to use bioforms that big in the lore. I guess the logical choice will be something kind of similar to the Hierophant, but on perhaps a smaller scale. I feel like when Games Workshop tends to make their own versions of Forge World things, they might make it an adjacent version rather than a direct remake. I feel like a super heavy of some description, though, is pretty much odds on for a Tyranid release. Another possibility that I think would be fairly high up people's wish list for reimagined units in the faction would be the Tyranids Shrikes. These ones perhaps aren't the most complicated unit in the world, basically Tyranid warriors with wings. Forge World used to sell an upgrade kit for them, though I feel like if Games Workshop did remake them, they'd probably make them a little bit more different to the warriors and a bit more dynamic. I feel like you could do something pretty fun with posing with the wings and having them sort of taking off into the air. I guess it's not impossible that we might well have seen a Shrike in that Tyranid thing with the wings that was jumping around in the trailer. My guess is, though, that that will probably be a winged prime or leader for them, and I feel like there's at least a reasonable possibility that he is a winged warrior type character, and then we get some regular Shrikes as well to back him up. Finally, for some of the things that I think would be more obvious Tyranid units to redo would also be the Genestealers. I feel like they've been odds on for a remake at some stage for really quite a long while now. The current models are pretty ancient and pretty iconic to Warhammer 40k lore, and I'd be frankly kind of amazed if they made through a Tyranids Codex update without having a remake. They did make a bunch of new Genestealer sculpts at some point, these ones for Space Hulk a while back, but they never really saw a general plastic release beyond that game. I was also vaguely surprised that they didn't actually release them during that Kill Team Into the Dark series. I feel like having a Genestealer kill team would have been pretty awesome on Space Hulk type terrain. Would have seemed like a very appropriate way to release them to me. If they're doing Genestealers as well, they potentially could give them the option for different upgrades and a different build maybe. You could maybe give them the option to make an Imgal Genestealer variant with the tentacled heads. They've been another thing that's been part of Genestealer lore for a fair while, one of the precursors to them in the fluff. In any case, let me know what models you think that Tyranids most need in their range in 10th edition. It's been fun to go over a few ideas here. I suspect that we'll probably get a super heavy, and I think there's a reasonable chance of things like Genestealers, Shrikes, or the other named characters being redone. I'm sure we'll get a bunch of other stuff though that are pretty much just new units to the Tyranids, other things added in. Let me know what you think is most likely down in the comments. I'll certainly be looking forward to covering any new news of Tyranids here on the channel though. Hopefully Games Workshop won't take too long in keeping some more pictures of some cool bugs coming, and I'll look forward to covering their models and rules here on the channel. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on Auspex Tactics, I would just like to mention as well that I do have a Patreon page, and you can find that one linked down in the video description if you'd like to support the creation of more videos. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening though, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.